Have you ever stood before the immense, silent stones of an ancient ruin and felt a whisper on the wind? A faint echo of a story, too old for written words, yet too powerful to fade away completely? We are surrounded by these echoes. They come to us as myths or tales of gods wrestling with titans, of global floods sent by angry deities, of golden ages lost to time. For centuries, we've dismissed these stories as mere fantasies, the primitive attempts of our ancestors to explain a world they did not understand. But what if we've been wrong? What if these legends are not just fanciful fiction, but a kind of deep, cultural memory, a distorted, poetic retelling of actual, cataclysmic events that shaped the very dawn of human civilization? This is not a search for magic wands or cyclopean monsters, but a detective story etched in geology, encoded in genetics, and whispered through generations of oral tradition. This is the quest to uncover the hidden truth behind ancient myths, to listen to the secrets of forgotten legends not as fairy tales, but as the frantic, last messages from a world we have lost. Our story begins not in a dusty library, but on a sun-scorched island in the Aegean Sea, and it will lead us to a discovery that challenges everything we thought we knew about a legendary catastrophe. Part 1. The Legend of Atlantis, a story too detailed to be false. The year is 360 BC. In the city of Athens, the philosopher Plato is writing two of his most famous dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. He is not writing a history book, but a philosophical parable about the ideal state and the dangers of imperial arrogance. To make his point, he recounts a story told to his ancestor, Solon, by an Egyptian priest in the city of Say. The priest speaks of a mighty power that rose from an island in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. This was Atlantis, a confederation of kings of great and marvelous power. Plato describes it with astonishing detail. The central city was built on a series of concentric rings of land and water, connected by great canals and tunnels large enough for a trireme to sail through. The walls were plated with precious metals, brass, tin, and the mysterious orichalcum, a metal that glowed like fire. The temples were lavish, the docks teeming with ships, the army vast and sophisticated. The Atlanteans, initially virtuous, became corrupted by their own power and greed. They lost their divine nature, Plato writes, and became filled with unjust ambition. They set out to conquer the entire Mediterranean, subduing lands as far as Libya and Egypt. It was the fledgling, ideal state of ancient Athens that stood alone against this Leviathan and defeated it, preserving freedom for the known world. But then, the real catastrophe struck. There occurred violent earthquakes and floods. The Egyptian priest tells Solon, and in a single day and night of misfortune a broken bar, the island of Atlantis, disappeared into the depths of the sea. For over 2 millennia, this story has captivated explorers, scholars, and dreamers. Most classical historians dismissed it as pure fiction, a literary device invented by Plato to serve his philosophical argument. The details were too perfect, the moral too clear. But a stubborn few asked a simple question: why would Plato, a thinker dedicated to truth, go to such pains to provide specific geographical and historical context if it was all a lie? He insists the story is true, a record preserved by the Egyptians when other cultures had forgotten. The search for a literal Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean has proven futile. The geology doesn't support a continent sinking in a day. But what if the legend itself is an echo of a real event, transplanted to a different location to serve a philosophical narrative? What if Atlantis was never in the Atlantic at all? Part 2. The Minoans, a historical mystery. Let us travel east, to the warm waters of the Aegean Sea. Here, nestled between the Greek mainland and the coast of Turkey, lies the island of Crete. At the dawn of the 20th century, a flamboyant and determined English archaeologist named Sir Arthur Evans began digging at a site called Knossos. What he unearthed would send shockwaves through the world of archaeology. He discovered the remains of a vast, sophisticated, and utterly unexpected palace complex. It was a labyrinthine structure with multiple levels, elaborate living quarters, vibrant frescoes depicting bull-leaping athletes and graceful, bare-breasted priestesses, advanced drainage systems, and storerooms containing enormous clay jars called pithoi that could hold tons of olive oil and grain. This was not the civilization of the later, classical Greeks. It was older, far older. Evans named it the Minoan civilization, after the legendary King Minos of Crete. The Minoans were a maritime superpower. Their fleet dominated the eastern Mediterranean from around 3000 to 1450 BC. They were a people of astonishing artistry and apparent peace. Their palaces were unfortified, suggesting a thalassocracy, a sea-based empire so powerful it needed no walls. They traded with Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia. Their culture was vibrant, sophisticated, and unique. And then, around the middle of the 15th century BC, it ended abruptly. All the major Minoan palaces on Crete, Knossos, Phaistos, Melia, were destroyed simultaneously. The cause was a mystery. There was no evidence of a massive invasion, no layers of ash from a great war. The civilization simply a broken bar collapsed. For decades, the leading theory was that they had been conquered by the more warlike Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. But that theory had holes. Why were all the palaces destroyed at once? Where was the evidence of battle? The mystery of the Minoan collapse was a historical puzzle waiting for a geological key. Part 3. The Turning Point. A geological colossus awakens. 70 miles north of Crete lies a small, crescent-shaped island known today as Santorini. In ancient times, it was called Thera. In the 1960s, archaeologists began digging on Thera, at a site now known as Akrotiri. What they found was staggering. Buried under layers of volcanic ash, like a Bronze Age Pompeii, was a complete Minoan town. The buildings were 3 stories high. The streets were laid out with sophisticated plumbing, and the walls were covered in breathtaking frescoes of a flourishing, peaceful society of ships sailing in a busy harbor, antelopes roaming, young women gathering saffron. Thera was not just a Minoan outpost, it was a vibrant, wealthy, and fully Minoan settlement. And it was sitting directly on top of one of the largest volcanoes in the world. Geologists began to piece together the story. Around 1600 BC, the volcano on Thera erupted. But this was not a typical eruption. It was one of the most colossal volcanic explosions in human history. A cataclysm now estimated to have been 4 times more powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883. Let us imagine the scene, not as a dry geological fact, but as a human experience. The atmosphere, the first signs would have been subtle. A low, persistent rumble deep underground, felt more than heard. The earth trembles slightly, causing pottery to clink together on shelves. The birds fall silent. Then, the smell of sulfur, thick and acrid, begins to permeate the air. The sky, once a brilliant Aegean blue, takes on a hazy, yellowish tinge. The dialogue of doom. An old fisherman, his face leathered by the sun, looks out from the harbor of Akrotiri towards the darkening peak of the island. He turns to his son, who is mending a net. The mountain grumbles again. "Father," the son says, trying to sound unconcerned. The old man shakes his head, his eyes clouded with a fear his son does not yet understand. "Not like this, Alexandros. I have felt the tremors all my life. These a broken bar. This is different. The earth is not stirring. It is awakening." The eruption, the initial phase, a Plinian eruption, sends a column of superheated ash and pumice rocketing 40 kilometers into the stratosphere. Day turns to night as a black cloud blots out the sun. For days, hot pumice and ash rain down on Thera, burying Akrotiri under meters of light, grey rock, preserving it perfectly but suffocating any life left behind. The inhabitants, heeding the warnings, had likely already fled by sea. But the worst was yet to come. The magma chamber beneath the island, now emptied of vast quantities of material, could no longer support the weight of the island above it. The center of the island collapsed in on itself, creating a massive, seawater-filled caldera over 400 meters deep. The result was apocalyptic. The sudden collapse of hundreds of cubic kilometers of rock into the sea triggered a tsunami of unimaginable proportions. A wall of water, initially hundreds of meters high, radiated outwards from Thera at the speed of a jet aircraft. Within 30 minutes, it struck the northern coast of Crete, 70 miles away. The wave would have been tens of meters high, a liquid scythe scouring the coastline. The Minoan fleet, the source of their wealth and power, would have been smashed to splinters against the cliffs or dragged out to sea. Coastal settlements, including their great palaces which were built near the shore for easy maritime access, were utterly obliterated. The fertile farmland that sustained the population was inundated with salt water, rendering it barren for generations. The ash cloud would have blotted out the sun across the entire eastern Mediterranean for years, causing a volcanic winter. Crops failed. Famine spread. The sophisticated, centralized economy of the Minoans, dependent on trade and agriculture, collapsed overnight. The mighty Minoan civilization did not fall to a foreign army. It was decapitated by a force of nature so vast, so incomprehensible, that it could only be described as an act of the gods. Part 4. The Hidden Truth, a connecting myth to catastrophe. This is where our detective work begins in earnest. The geological evidence is clear. A highly advanced, maritime civilization on Crete was effectively erased from history by a colossal volcanic eruption and tsunami from Thera. Now, let's listen again to the legend of Atlantis, not as a story from the Atlantic, but as a possible echo of this very real event. The island nation, Atlantis, was a powerful island kingdom. The Minoan civilization was a powerful island kingdom. Advanced society, Atlantis was described as having advanced architecture, sophisticated engineering, and lavish art. The Minoan palaces, with their multi-story buildings, intricate plumbing, and vibrant frescoes, match this description perfectly. Maritime power, Atlantis had a mighty fleet that dominated the seas. The Minoans were the premier naval power of their age. Concentric rings. Plato's description of the concentric rings of land and water is the most fantastical element. But look at a map of Thera before the eruption. Geological reconstructions show it was likely a single island with a central volcanic peak. However, to a sailor approaching it, the main island of Crete, with Thera as its outpost, could be poetically remembered as a larger island containing smaller concentric ones, especially after the story was transmitted orally for centuries. The catastrophe, Atlantis sank into the sea in a single day and night. The Minoan civilization was destroyed in a geological instant. The caldera collapse of Thera literally caused a large part of an island to vanish beneath the waves. For all intents and purposes, the heart of the Minoan world did sink. The metal orichalcum, Plato's mysterious glowing metal, has never been identified. But the Minoans were master metal workers. Could orichalcum be a folk memory of a particular bronze alloy, perhaps tinted with gold or other metals, that was prized by the Minoans and lost to later generations? The Egyptian connection, this is crucial. Plato states the story came from Egypt. The Minoans had extensive trade relations with Egypt. The Egyptians would have known of this powerful, island-based sea people. Then, suddenly, the trade would have stopped. The Minoan ships would have ceased arriving. Egyptian records from this period speak of unusual weather, darkness, and chaos. It is entirely plausible that the Egyptians recorded the catastrophic disappearance of their trading partner, a story that was later passed down and eventually told to Solon. The legend of Atlantis, therefore, is not a literal history. It is a palimpsest to a manuscript where the original text has been scraped away and written over, but faint traces remain. The original text is the Thera eruption and the fall of the Minoans. The new text is Plato's philosophical allegory, which moved the location to the Atlantic to suit his narrative about a power beyond the known world. But the Atlantis story is not the only myth that echoes this event. Part 5. Forgotten legends, echoes in the wind. The trauma of the Thera eruption was so profound that its shockwaves reverberated through the myths of all the cultures within its reach. The Greek myth of Deucalion's flood. Long before the story of Atlantis, the Greeks told of a great flood sent by Zeus to punish humanity. The Titan Prometheus warned his son, Deucalion, to build a chest. Deucalion and his wife Paia survived the flood that drowned the world. And after the waters receded, they repopulated the earth by throwing the bones of their mother, stones from the earth, behind them, which sprang up as new people. This story of a world-engulfing flood, survived only by a few, mirrors the tsunami that would have seemed to swallow the entire world for the people living on the coasts of Crete and the Aegean. The Egyptian tempest stele, in Egypt, a stone inscription from the reign of Pharaoh Ahmose I, around 1550 BC, describes a period of unprecedented chaos. The gods expressed their discontent. The sky burst into a tempest of rain in darkness, with no end in sight. The roar was louder than the cries of the masses. This is highly unusual for Egypt, which relies on predictable weather. The timing aligns perfectly with the theory eruption. The ash cloud, the strange weather, the darkness all would have been recorded by the Egyptians as divine wrath, a direct parallel to the anger of the gods in the Greek flood myth. These are not coincidences. They are the cultural scars left by a shared trauma. A people who experience a tsunami will tell stories about a great flood. A people who see the sun blotted out for weeks will tell stories about the gods battling for control of the sky. These myths are the ancient equivalent of a geological core sample, preserving a layer of profound, real-world catastrophe. Part 6. The powerful conclusion at the truth in the legend. So, what is the hidden truth behind these ancient myths? The secret of the forgotten legend of Atlantis? It is this: our oldest stories are not mere fantasies. They are a profound form of historical transmission. Before widespread literacy, oral tradition was the hard drive of human experience. Catastrophic events on the scale of the theory eruption were so deeply traumatic that they were burned into the collective memory of every culture that witnessed their effects. Over centuries, the specific details said the name of the island, the exact data faded or were altered, but the core of the story remained. A powerful, advanced civilization was wiped out in a single, terrible day by the fury of the earth and sea. The legend of Atlantis is the ghost of the Minoan civilization, haunting the imagination of humanity for 3,500 years. The story weaves together a memory of Minoan sophistication with the trauma of their incomprehensible demise. Plato, hearing an ancient version of this story, recognized its power and used it as the vehicle for his timeless warning about the corrupting nature of power. This discovery does not diminish the myths, it makes them more powerful. It means that when our Bronze Age ancestors spoke of gods flooding the world or islands sinking beneath the waves, they were not just making up stories, they were trying to make sense of the most terrifying event their world had ever known. They were bearing witness. The ruins of Akrotiri on Thera and Knossos on Crete are the physical proof. The silent, ash-preserved streets of Akrotiri are the reality behind the legend. They are a snapshot of a vibrant world, frozen in its final moments. There are no skeletons in poses of agony like in Pompeii. The people likely escaped, but their culture, their world, did not. The hidden truth is that mythology is often a veiled history. The secrets of forgotten legends are not secrets of magic, but secrets of survival, memory, and the indomitable human need to tell the story of what happened, even when the event itself is too vast to comprehend. The next time you hear an ancient myth of a great flood or a lost city, listen closely. You are not just hearing a fairy tale. You are hearing the faint, echoing voice of our ancestors, whispering a warning from across the millennia, telling us of a time when the earth shook, the sea roared, and a great civilization vanished beneath the waves, leaving behind only a legend. And in that legend, lies a truth more compelling than any fiction.